Hi everyone, welcome to the March 22nd edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski as we are looking ahead to Saturday's card at Fairgrounds. It is Louisiana Derby Day. An all-stakes pick 5 is on tap, races 8 through 12, culminating with that final race of the day, that Grade 2 Louisiana Derby, which does offer 100 Kentucky Derby qualifying points to the winner. Those 100-point prep races do kick off this weekend. We've got a couple of them, both this Louisiana Derby at Fairgrounds, as well as the Jeff Ruby Stakes at Turfway. So we're going to get some clarity with regard to that Kentucky Derby picture moving into this weekend, and then that all is going to get settled over the next 3 weeks. So we'll see how that plays out, but definitely looking forward to this Louisiana Derby because you've got plenty of contenders that could potentially march on to the first Saturday in May in this race, but they all have to take that next step up to beat this group going a demanding mile and 3/16 distance. So we'll see how that all plays out, but it's a really fun card on Saturday at Fairgrounds. Many of full fields throughout the day, a quartet of Grade 2 events, and it kicks off with actually one of the most interesting races on the card, which is not a graded stakes, but the listed Tom Benson Memorial that's on the turf for the fillies and mares. We proceed on through the New Orleans Classic, the Mervyn Muniz Classic, and then those pair of stakes for the 3-year-olds. The female counterpart, the Fairgrounds Oaks, is race 11, and then, like I said, race 12 being that Louisiana Derby. Craig, I don't know about you, I had a lot of fun handicapping this sequence.
I did have a lot of fun handicapping it. It's a tough one for sure. It's funny you mentioned these are all grade 4. These are Grade 2 races. The Louisiana Derby, it feels like this should be a Grade 1 at this point, but we've talked about the Graded Stakes Committee in the past. I'm not sure what else you can say. This is a good, strong, deep race, a big field. It seems to be that way since they've changed the distance to that mile and 3/16. It definitely seems to have helped the race, and we got 4 other races to talk about before we even get to that one, and I didn't find any of them to be particularly easy.
You know, it's funny. I was talking with Brad Free, who I do the Derby Watch with on DRF's YouTube channel, about the productivity of the Louisiana Derby and how this has become such a popular prep race. It seems over the past several years, a lot of connections try to use this path through Fairgrounds to get to the Kentucky Derby with those greater tests of stamina, with the increased distances from mile and a 16th to a mile and an eighth in the Risen Star, and now the 9.5 furlongs in the Louisiana Derby. But it's kind of funny, Craig, you know who the only 2 Louisiana Derby participants are to come back and actually be successful in the Kentucky Derby, though successful in quotation marks, are actually those winners with asterisks next to their names, those being Country House as well as Mandaloun. So not necessarily a race that's produced horses that crossed the wire first in the Kentucky Derby in recent years. I think you've got to go back to Grindstone in 1996 to find a Louisiana Derby winner that actually won and crossed the wire first in the Kentucky Derby. But definitely, it seems like it's been a prep series that a lot of connections do find likable, that fits their desired schedules to get to that run for the roses. And this field, it kind of speaks to that. It's a really competitive race. We'll get to a little bit later and talk more about it, but it is kind of interesting to look back at that recent history.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned Grindstone. It's kind of funny. It tells how much times has changed. Yes, I remember distinctly him winning the Louisiana Derby, and he actually ran in the Arkansas Derby in between, something that would never happen these days. It's obviously not even possible with the schedule, but the Louisiana Derby used to be kind of like a two back from the Derby race, whereas now it's a last prep.
Well, Craig, let's get right into the handicapping because there's a lot to talk about, and we've been going a little over time recently on our forecast, so we'll see if we can squeeze this one into a more manageable hour time frame. We'll see how that works out because I think there are a lot of horses to discuss in this sequence, but let's begin with, like I was saying, one of the most complicated races in this Pick 5 and really on the entire card at Fairgrounds Saturday. That is race 8, the Tom Benson Memorial, which kicks off this Pick 5 sequence. It is a 15% takeout Pick 5, I'll note, so that is player friendly at Fairgrounds. Mile and 16th being the distance for the fillies and mares on the turf course. And Craig, I think interesting conversation kind of starts with the Al Stall Memorial, which was the race that feeds into this from Risen Star Day. And we've got multiple participants coming out of the Al Stall into this Tom Benson. However, it does feel like this came up a much deeper competitive race overall because you've got some new faces, horses shipping in from Florida, those that have not previously competed at fairgrounds during this winter. So I wouldn't just default to the Al Stall horses, though I do think you can make some observations from watching trips in that race. And there are contenders maybe coming out of it, but definitely it's a more wide open race than just that.
Oh, I would agree for sure. I think it's a tougher race, and it's a theme we're going to talk about in all these races. We're having a lot of horses run back from that Risen Star card, and I don't think the Al Stall was a particularly strong race. It was the same as this one, a listed. This one has a little higher purse, but definitely seems to have drawn some tougher competition.
Yeah, and I guess we could start the conversation with the horse that I think is the morning line favorite, the number 9, Spirit and Glory. I think she's the lukewarm 4-1 choice. She was the winner of the Al Stall Memorial, but Craig, we talked about it on the Pacecast afterwards, and she just got an absolutely perfect trip and ride that day from Flavien Prat, who, of course, is back aboard here. But that was sort of that first turf race on Risen Star Day when they had taken all the previous races off the turf, and the course was rated as soft. In retrospect, not sure it was quite that soft because I think the track condition rating for that day was a 6, which is more indicative of a good to yielding course. But that said, a lot of the jockeys were avoiding the rail, as you might be apt to do, and of course that has taken a lot of rain, not wanting to get mired down in that wet going towards the inside. But it turned out the rail was just fine, and Flavien Prat went there on Spirit and Glory, was able to save that valuable ground and come up the inside. And I think when you watch back that Al Stall Memorial, you want to take note of the fact that most of the horses who had inside position for a good portion of that race were those that were successful. Spirit and Glory came up the rail, and both the second and third place finishers trying my heart at them watch this birdie, while they were wider in the stretch and angled out for the stretch drive, they did save ground in the early portions of that race. So I think all three got pretty good trips, and it could be more difficult to work out a trip in this large field, and they have to do so against the tougher group.
For sure. And like you said, that was quite the trip. And this is a big 14 horse field. Spirit and Glory is, in fact, the morning line favorite at just 4-1. But for me, I mean, I have to respect her. I can't totally discount her, but she's going to be an underlay. So I'm not sure at this point if I'll have her on my ticket or not. It certainly wouldn't be as like an A or a B type if so. Believe it or not, if I was going to go to a horse from that race, it would be one of the longer shots in the field, and that's the 8-horse Girl Named Charlie, who I just thought got a really tough trip. She was one that was wide all the way around. Even though we don't have the fractions in red, it's one that the piece was in the 130s early. She was pressing it. Didn't have a whole lot left late, but it's not like she was betting, beaten terribly, only just over 5 lengths. And what interests me is she is just a 4-year-old who, in her first start as a 4-year-old, ran a career best speed figure. She even matched that one last time out with a 112 when she was beaten in the Al Stall. And I just think she has a much better race in her than we saw that day. Not saying she's my top pick, but out of all those horses coming from that race, I'm really interested in her at a big price.
Yeah, we agree about that Al Stall in general. I'm not going to make Girl Named Charlie my top pick again. I picked her that day, and I was a little disappointed in the moment that she didn't run that well, or at least didn't achieve a result that I was hoping for. But as you said, going back to watch that race in retrospect and thinking about how horses with rail position really had the benefit, like she was never inside, as you noted. She was 3 to 4 wide around both turns. That's a tough trip to pull on a fair turf course, and it seemed like it was a very fair turf course at Fairgrounds on February 17th, despite how the riders rode the race. So I think she's one that you can upgrade. I do wonder where her ceiling is because I do believe this is a tougher race than the Al Stall, so I do think she's going to have to step up and produce a career best effort. But like I said, going back to handicapping that race, she's going out for a very dangerous barn that you don't want to discount at a big price. So she's one that I could definitely upgrade and have somewhere in the mix. But I do think that this race really goes through some of the shippers coming in here from different circuits, Craig. And the one that I think we have to talk about first is the number 10 Delahaye, who, although she's 6-1 on the morning line, I am not going to be surprised when she ultimately vies for favoritism in this race. There's just so much to like about this horse. She's been visually impressive in both of her turf victories, coming in as a lightly raced sort for Chad Brown. These kinds of horses that seem to have upside for this barn tend to take a lot of money. And, Craig, she's going to get a real class test here stepping up, but based on her speed figures and the visual impression of her races, I'm not going to be surprised when she turns out to be pretty good.
No, she's clearly very talented, and she's the one, another one I'm debating for my top pick. She's run close up both of her last two times, but I don't necessarily think she has to run that way. It's just there wasn't a whole lot of speed in those races. The last one, I think it was almost a race where she took the lead by default from the rail. It was pretty much an overmatched group that day, as really nobody from that race has come back to do much. Her maiden win was pretty strong, though. A lot of horses have come back to win, so I don't think there's anything wrong with the figures, and I definitely think she's a contender. The one thing people might question in here is Irad Ortiz isn't on that horse. He's on a shipper that he normally is a trainer. Obviously, he normally wouldn't ride for, but I don't really pay too much attention to that stuff. We don't know when Delahaye committed here and if maybe he already had a commitment. So I'm not going to read into that. I think Delahaye has a big shot.
Yeah, and Tyler Gaffaleone's been getting a lot of live mounts from Chad Brown recently, and he elected to put him on Sierra Leone in the Risen Star over the Ortiz brothers. So maybe it's not a big surprise that he is on Delahaye in this race. And I also don't view her as some sort of need the lead type, even though she had the lead last time, as you were saying, just kind of wound up there by default. And if you go back and watch her debut race, that might actually be one of the more impressive races that she ran in her career, because she did not get a good trip that day, was out wide every step of the way with no cover for much of her trip, and still just barely lost that race to a subsequent stakes winner in Love Appeals. So she's good. I have no argument that she is one of the horses to beat in this race. I just think that 6-1 might be a bit of a mirage, and she's probably going to get that down off that. We'll see how that all plays out. Craig, who are you looking at being more interested in this race? Because it sounds like we haven't yet arrived at your topic, and I'm wondering if we might agree in this spot.
Yeah, I honestly am not sure who it's going to be, but I'm going to throw out another horse. I think it's going to be really dangerous, and that's the 13 horse, Not So Close, who's shown on a big lead, easy lead on the pace projector. And when I look at the PPs, I don't really have a big argument with that. It won't be easy from the 13 post, but I don't think there's really a ton of speed in this race. So I don't want to totally discount her as well. I could see a scenario where she goes wire to wire. She comes out of that outstall. She was one that avoided the rail at all costs and kind of packed it in late. Really, the last furlong just totally gave it up. But I don't want to dismiss her at all. I think she has a real shot in here. And then there's another shipper I'm interested in Gloria's Princess, another 4-year-old. I mentioned I kind of like that this time of year. She has figures that compete in this race as well. Now, she's one that also wants to be in the lead, so maybe she winds up dueling with Not So Close, but I could see her getting a good forward trip. This is a race where I'll definitely be spreading in, as I'm sure you probably figured out, but it's going to be with several price horses.
Yeah, this is an intriguing pace projector, because I would have expected this race to have the fast pace flag, just given the size of the field and the fact that there do appear to be at least a couple of frontrunners in this race, and you just highlighted them, but no fast pace flag. I think that's maybe coming down to some close calls with the running styles for a few horses being labeled as mid-pack types instead of trackers or potentially leaders in speeds. Not So Close. She's definitely going for the front in here, and I agree, Craig. There is a way to look at her Al stall and say that she also did not get the right trip that day, because even though she was leading, Ricardo Santana made the point to keep her out in the 3-path every step of the way, which probably was not where you wanted to be, and not really seizing the full advantage that you would have being the front runner, which is saving ground. So she might be a little better than that performance, and she does have some big speed figures to get back to. I just can't get past that recent record for the Norm Cassie barn. It's just a barn that has been dead for months now, going back over the past 4 months in Formulator. He's just 4 for 66 with a 46-cent ROI. And this is a barn that was winning absolutely everything last year. I think I remember handicapping this Louisiana Derby card in 2023, which I think was one of the biggest scores we made on this podcast last year. And one of the reasons I liked South Lawn in the Fairgrounds Oaks was because the Norm Cassie barn was just been on fire at that time of year. And it's a totally opposite story right now. So, I mean, Not So Close is probably going to be a price in this race. And I wouldn't talk anybody off a price just due to a stable not winning that much. But it is something that kind of sticks in my mind a little bit when I'm assessing her chances. As for that other horse that you threw out there, the 5 Glorious Princess, I agree. I am really interested in this horse for a number of reasons. She showed real potential on the turf last year when she was winning those stakes in the beginning of her 3-year-old season, earning speed figures of 110 and 111 at Churchill Downs and Ellis Park. Not beating much in those races, but showing real potential on this surface. And then I thought her Lake Placid at Saratoga before the layoff was not nearly as bad as the result might indicate. Obviously, she actually improved her TimeformUS speed figure a little bit because I thought the pace of that race was fairly competitive. And Luis Saez gave her a somewhat aggressive ride to go after a leader that day who she did ultimately put away. And then that race just went to closers at the end. And it's turned out that was a pretty strong affair. Surge Capacity obviously went on to win a grade 1 later in the year. Glorious Princess came off the layoff last time at Gulfstream and ran into a good horse in Sweet Danny Girl. And I thought she ran fine that day. Again, couldn't really sustain her speed after setting the pace, but she does figure to be fitter second off the layoff. And I was looking up some stats for trainer Brendan Walsh and Formulator, second off a layoff of 150 to 300 days, so about 5 to 10 months on the turf. He is 17 for 59, 29% win rate with a $3.48 ROI. So that says to me that this horse is likely to benefit from that return race, and we could see a step forward here. So I'm pretty interested in Glorious Princess as well. And Craig, we mentioned her in passing. What do you do with a horse like the number 12 Ouvra, who has been a win machine, including plenty of races at the fairgrounds, both on the turf and the dirt, clearly a course specialist, and she's just been in great form for a number of seasons now. But you do have to question a little bit the distance and the class level for her because they've just concentrated on sprint races for the majority of her career.
Yeah, it is a dilemma for her. I mean, she's tried routes, I think, only 2 times. Both times were on the turf. No, I think there was one on the dirt, an extended 1-turn mile. But she's done all right. I mean, she won a race at Keeneland. She was 5-2. I just really question if she fits in a field like this. I mean, yes, she's a good horse, no doubt about it. But a lot of her wins have come over Illinois breds. They've come in lesser races. And even though this is a listed race, it feels more like a grade 3 to me. And I'm just not quite sure she's that kind of horse. She doesn't get a great post position. And she's one of those ones when you were talking about the pace projector, I think she's shown up fairly close in 4th. She's listed as a mid-pack. I honestly don't know what she's going to be going this distance because she's running a lot of sprints. There's been times in her career she's went wire to wire. So I really didn't know what to do with her. But my guess is she's probably going to be overbet in this spot.
Yeah, and when I went back and watched both of those 1-mile races, she showed a really concerning tendency in both of them, and that was to lug out badly, and not just gradually. I mean, she took a right-hand turn in the stretch of both that race at Keeneland in October, and then the same thing in the Chaluki, almost like she got to 7/8 of a mile into the race and was like, hold on, the race should be over by now. I'm done. And she just made this right-hand turn to sort of run towards the winner's circle. Not a tendency that you want to see. And now she's got to go a 16th of a mile further than that. She just seems like a horse that doesn't really want to go this added distance. And maybe Irad Ortiz will help her, but he's also, as you said, going to attract a lot more money to her. So she was not for me in this race. I was going to play against Ouvra. Now, Craig, another horse that I have to bring up because I've been such a fan of hers, and I think she's far from impossible in this race, is the number 14, Freitas the Red. This is probably just a starting point coming back off the layoff because last year I think she did prove herself to be a horse that probably wants the longer distances, a mile and 3/16, a mile and a quarter, and potentially even beyond that. But she's got plenty of speed figures from the midpoint to the end of her 3-year-old season that put her right in the mix here. I thought she ran really well to win that Dueling Grounds Oaks, which was a longer race, so being able to take advantage of her stamina that day. But you'll look at the 2 times that she stepped up against grade 1 company, and she really just had no chance in either race. I think there's a scenario where she might have won the Belmont Oaks, but was just given no chance by being wide around both turns. And then in the QE2 last time, she was not winning that race. Maj and some of those that finished ahead of her are just better than she is. That was a pretty tough spot. And she also, breaking from the outside, was wide every step of the way without much cover. So I'm not going to hold that race against her. I think she's coming back in an appropriate spot from a class level standpoint. And Ken McPeak, while the percentages are not that high, he actually has really strong ROIs coming back off layoffs like this of about 4 to 8 months in turf routes. He's 5 for 30, 228 ROI. In routes in general, he's 15 for 113 with a 296 ROI. So I think Freitas the Red could fly under the radar here. I don't know if she's going to be, as high as that 20-1 morning line, because I think there are things to like about her, but I don't think she's going to be that short of price in this race, despite those competitive speed figures and accomplishments from last year. And while the pace might look a little murky, it's not clear how many speeds are really going to go with the 5 and 13. I could see, as you were alluding to, a situation where this pace does heat up a little more than the pace projector indicates. And if it comes apart, maybe it does play to her stamina a little more than it might appear on paper.
Yeah, and we haven't really talked about the weather. It's raining today on Friday as we record this at the fairgrounds, and it's possible we get a course with a lot of give in it. So I'm certainly not going to try to talk you off a 20-1 shot. I'm looking for horses to beat those from the Al stall, and she certainly fits the bill. And she's going to be a big price. I don't know if she'll be 20-1, but she's not going to be 8-1 or anything like that, I don't believe.
I think we've covered a lot of horses in this race. I mean, there are many we could talk about if we went on even further. I mean, horses like Messidor and Tufani, you might intrigue some horses. I think they both have some class questions to answer, maybe having to run a little faster, but it is a wide open race, and there are many ways to go, a treacherous way to start this pick 5 sequence. Let's move on to race 9, the Grade 2 New Orleans Classic. This one going 1.125 miles on the dirt course. And even though there is some rain predicted and having already fallen as we record this Friday morning, it seems very likely that the main track is going to be fast by the time we get to Saturday. There's really no rain predicted on Saturday at Fairgrounds. So that's good news for this race, as well as for those 3-year-olds that finally get to test themselves over a fast track in the Louisiana Derby a little bit later on. This race is likely to have one scratch. The number 10, Lure Him In, reported by our colleague Marcus Hirsch, is not running him this race. He's going to start at Gulfstream instead. So likely to scratch down to at least 9 here. I guess there's the potential for one more scratch, Craig. The last I heard, it sounds like the number 3, Touch Upon a Star, the connections are leaning towards running in this race, which I think is good news. Whether you like him or not, you want to see a horse like this get tested against graded stakes company. I know they tried the Sexton Mile last year against what was maybe a slightly softer field than this, but since then he's been back in great form against Louisiana breds, and you want to see a horse like this get his chance to shine on a day like Louisiana Derby Day.
For sure. I hope he runs. And like you said, Marcus Hirsch reported it's a strong lean to go here. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that he does. And I also think that'll affect the pace. We have this as a fast-paced race with him in it. I think that would change if he were to come out, but it doesn't look like he will. And I think that's worth noting as we go through this race. It's a pretty strong field. We saw a lot of these horses in that last race, for the Mine Shaft, I believe it was, which was won by Money Supply, narrowly edging out Best Actor. They're both back in here. So a good, tough race and a lot of different ways you could go.
Yeah, and I guess we should start by finishing up Touch Upon a Star, who is the morning line favorite in this race, installed at 3-1. And I get it. I kind of think he will be the favorite in this race if he runs here. He's just got a slew of speed figures that make him as fast as anybody else in here. And he's got that string of ones that a lot of handicappers just can't resist. He's been very impressive in a number of his recent victories. And it's not like he's been beating nobody in some of these races against Louisiana breds or even at Delta Downs. He beat 5-star General 3 back in that Delta Mile, who did come back and win a stakes at Fairgrounds on this road towards the New Orleans Classic. Two back, he defeated Tumbarumba in that Louisiana Classic, going this mile and an eighth distance. And I think it's fair to question whether a mile and an eighth is really the best distance for Touch Upon a Star, because he's been campaigned a little bit more often going shorter than this. They previously tried a graded stakes going a flat mile, but he did show that he could beat a good horse going 9 furlongs two back. And then last time he was beating nobody, but just setting up for this race with a prep, now coming back in about 7 or 8 weeks. Seems like he's set up to put forth a good effort here, Craig, if they decide to run. I think the question you have to ask with Touch Upon a Star is, what really is a fair price on him, given the class questions that he's inevitably going to have to answer here?
Yeah, for sure. And that's something when the race comes to betting it individually, I'd have to consider. I think I'm going to have to use him in the pick five because I think he's really good. Even that one loss that he had at Lone Star in the Sexton Mile, that was just a race that absolutely completely fell apart. And yet he held on for second. He was up dueling in ridiculously fast fractions. The first, third, and fourth place finishers all came from way back. So I'm even giving him a pass for that one. I think it's not even debatable. He was probably the best horse in that race. So I think he's really good. He's not a horse I would put a win bet on at what's probably going to be a short price, because he is going to face some other speed in here. We've already talked about Just Actor or Best Actor, but it's not like he can't win from off the pace. He's pressed paces before and won. He prefers the front, but he doesn't have to be there. He's proven he can sit second, and I expect him to run really well.
Yeah, I just can't get past the idea that I don't believe there's really any value in taking Touch Upon a Star in this race or leaning upon him strongly, because when you just... So I think the clever idea with him, Craig, is to say, oh, he's a Louisiana bred who's really as good as graded stakes competition. And now you get to be right that, oh, he does stack up against graded stakes competition. And you could point to the speed figures and say, he's running just as fast as these other horses. And he's got all of these wins. He's just going to win again because he's a horse that loves to win and he's got the speed figure credentials. However, when you're looking at speed figures and not just saying he's going to win because he always wins, I know that's not the way that either of us handicap, and you're comparing him to Best Actor, from a fig standpoint, they're very similar. You could even argue that Best Actor has a slight speed figure edge over Touch Upon a Star. But even though Best Actor is going out for a barn like Brad Cox, Riddenfly, Flavien Prat, these two could be comparable prices, and I won't be surprised to Touch Upon a Star is even a tick lower than Best Actor, as is suggested on the morning line. And I kind of can't get past the idea when I handicap this race that Best Actor has just overcome a little bit more, and he's a more likely winner than Touch Upon a Star, in my view. So I have trouble getting to a viewpoint where I think Touch Upon a Star is the right value bet in this race, even though I do recognize he can win.
Yeah, I've got no issue with that. It's one where I'll definitely be checking the doubles to try to maybe get a gauge for who's going to take the money before I bet a pick five. But I could see a race where they're both kind of similar in price. And they're very close on the morning line, so that's not exactly breaking news. But I could also see a situation where these two wind up battling pretty hard on the front end. And that's why I'll just go right to the horse that I actually like quite a bit in here. And if memory serves, I think I liked them last time, and maybe you did too, but that's the 2-horse Gasoline. He was a horse last time. I have no idea what John Velasquez was doing, having him right up there in the front, basically in the middle of a 3-horse speed duel. It was blazing fast early. Now, I know it was a race that it didn't look like there was any speed on paper. It looked like it was just Best Actor and everybody else. And a couple jockeys maybe saw that too and decided to go for it. But I could easily envision a spot where Gasoline reverts to his normal come from off the pace tactics. He's a horse that on his best day has the speed figures to win a race like this. And I just don't see him falling for that trap again. And I expect a very good race from him.
Yeah, I did like Gasoline in that mine shaft. I thought he was a good bet at 7-1, and I don't think we were necessarily wrong. As you said, he was a little more aggressively ridden than maybe you were expecting, though remember, Craig, going into that race, that was a race on paper that looked like it had very little speed. We expected Best Actor to just dominate on the front end. So maybe in retrospect, in retrospect, you can say that Jean Velasquez was too aggressive, but maybe just a lot of jockeys got it in their head that you wanted to be aggressive in that race and not let Best Actor get away with a free ride on the front end. So I'm not going to be too critical. I think sometimes connections can overcorrect for a previous mistake. And going back to the Harlan's Holiday 2-back, they just got way too far back after a tough start. And I think the connections wanted to make sure that that didn't happen again. So they were a little more aggressive away from the starting gate, and Gasoline just sort of wound up in that awkward spot, dueling between horses, which is not where you want to be. I still thought he stayed on decently for third. I liked the grit that he showed coming onto the wire to hold off Red Route 1, who's a reliable finisher, to hold on for third that day. So I thought it was a step in the right direction. I also liked that Gasoline came on the track without front wraps, which he had been wearing in his 3 prior starts. To me, that's never a great sign for Todd Pletcher, because Pletcher rarely uses front wraps, and when he puts them on a horse, there's probably a reason for it. So good sign that they came off last time. Potentially there was an issue with Gasoline that is no longer present. And I watched his recent workouts coming into this, particularly the one on March 8th. He was in company with a turf horse, surprisingly, but he easily beat that filly and just seemed like he was really thriving in that drill. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's got a step forward in him coming into this race. And I agree with you that I think they're going to be a little more patient this time and try to work out that stalking trip from just off the pace as opposed to pressing this time. So I'm interested in him once again, and I think he could still be a fair price somewhere in that 6-1 to 7-1 range if this race holds together with only the number 10 scratching. So I am interested in him as well. I mean, Craig, what do you do with the winner of the Mine Shaft, Money Supply? I mean, he's another one, kind of like Touch Upon a Star, who's been on this win streak lately, and at least he did it against tough open company competition last time. He just got a very good trip in doing so.
He did get a good trip. It's not like that race fell apart. The 1-3 finishers, Best Actor and Gasoline, or the 2-3 finishers, were both part of that speed duel that he took advantage of. But it's not like there were other closers, particularly like Red Route 1. He was unable to make a dent. So I like the fact Money Supply was able to stay up close to that fast pace. I mean, yes, he was a closer, but he was only 4 lengths behind in the running line. That was the furthest back he got. So he does have tactical speed. I just wonder if last time wasn't the, obviously you would want to have him last time, and he's probably going to take more money this time, and I'm not sure he's going to get quite as good a trip, but I'm not going to be surprised if he wins again, because he's sure been doing a lot of that lately.
Yeah, he's a horse that I think is it's tough to totally dismiss in this race. I just think from a value standpoint, you missed the chance last time at 9-1, and now you're going to have to swallow a much shorter price on Money Supply, potentially against a slightly tougher field than he beat in that last race. And going back to the Mine Shaft, Craig, Best Actor did run the best race. I don't think there's any other way to look at it. The pace turned out to be a lot quicker than we were expecting, and I thought he was really game through the stretch to battle back all the way to the wire. He was actually trying to come back on Money Supply at the end of that race after it looked like Money Supply was going to go off and win by about 2 lengths when he blew past him in mid-stretch. I think Best Actor is really good. I like that he's drawn outside this time. I think it's going to give Flavien Prat some more options in case the number 3, Touch Upon a Star, is really intent on getting to the lead. So Best Actor in some ways I view as the most likely winner of this race. I just wouldn't want to go much lower than 3-1, 5-2 on him, and we'll see how they bet this race. If they go really hard for those 2 favorites, maybe that creates better value on some other horses, but I do view Best Actor as the most likely winner. There's one more horse that I have interest in, Craig, that I want to discuss and get your take on, and that's the number 7, Super Corinto. Sort of a wild card in this race. He was a Group 1 winner in Chile going all the way back to 2022. Kind of interesting to go back and look at those races where he tried Group 1 company in Chile back in April of that year, because he traded decisions with O'Connor, who we're now familiar with racing in the U.S., and a horse that would be very competitive in this race. And O'Connor was actually beaten by Super Corinto when they tested each other in that Gran Premio Hippodromo back in April of 2022. Now, obviously, that was nearly 2 years ago, and Super Corinto has only run 3 times since then, twice in the U.S., and I thought he ran pretty well in both of those allowance races at Gulfstream at the end of 2022. They tried the Dubai World Cup last year, and that just was too tough a spot for him, a disaster. Now he's been off for nearly a year, coming back in this race for a new trainer, Nacho Correas, after previously being with Amador Sanchez in the U.S. Big question mark coming back. Correas has decent numbers off playoffs. I guess it's interesting that Irad Ortiz is taking the mount on this horse, who does have back class and some prior form to suggest he could be competitive with this field. I did watch some of his workouts recently at Keeneland, and it looks like he's just building fitness slowly but surely. They're definitely putting the miles into him in the morning, but it's still a big ask to have him ready to fire a top effort off a layoff that's this long. I guess I'm just curious to know what price he's going to be in this race, if he could possibly be as high as 12 to 1 with IRAT riding. I don't know about that, but he's an intriguing runner to consider in here.
He is, and Wildcard describes exactly how I feel about him. I really don't know what to do with him. My lean would be that I'd be surprised if he's really ready to win a race like this off such a long layoff and just workouts. But I mean, if he's that kind of price, I could see using him on a ticket. He's probably not going to be for me. I just want to go in a few other directions. But again, he's another. I won't be shocked if he wins the race. But if he does so, he'd probably knock me out of the pick 5.
I was looking through this race, Craig. There were just too many horses I didn't want. I mean, I'm not going to go back to Red Route 1, who I just think has had chances, got a pace set up last time and still wasn't successful. He's not for me. We've already talked about the 2 and 3. Black Belt, I just don't think he's good enough. I thought he got a very good pace setup when he won last time, so not interested in him. Happy American. It's been a little while since I've seen a race that would make me interested in him in this spot. And I couldn't get to the number 8 Velocitor, who I just thought beat weaker last time and was life and death to get past Behemoth Star, who Touch Upon a Star has handled by open lengths on multiple occasions. So as I'm sort of crossing out multiple horses in this race, there aren't that many left that I'm really interested in. Obviously, Gasoline and Best Actor are the 2 primary ones, but Super Corinto is a horse that I think there are some angles to get there. And if he is a fair price, even 8 to 1 or 9 to 1, he's one that I would want to include somewhere on my ticket. So I'm probably a little more positive on him than you are.
Yeah, as I think about it, you're right. There is a lot of horses I tossed. And for me, it would probably come down to whether I use Money Supply or Super Corinto, or I guess it's just going to depend how deep my ticket is and how expensive it gets. As we're going to see, it thins out a little bit for me going on. It's not like I'm going to spread in every single race. And he is a wild card, and I guess I wouldn't want to get knocked out by a horse who might pay $20.
Well, Craig, I have an anticipation that we're going to agree in this next race, the Muniz Memorial Classic, race 10. It is going the 1.125 distance on the turf. And, I guess we can start by just talking about Strong Quality and Beatbox, because they're sort of the horses that have been knocking heads in this division leading up to this race in the local preps, like the Colonel E.R. Bradley and the Fairgrounds from Risen Star Day. And they're both fine, but I know we had talked about when we handicapped those races that they weren't coming up the strongest field, and the Strong Quality just kept finding himself in favorable pace situations against mostly high-level allowance optional claiming horses, maybe listed stakes types. This race came up more of a legitimate grade 2 event, and I think that Strong Quality and Beatbox, who both have benefited from very good trips, especially last time out in the fairgrounds, they're probably going to have to step up and run an even better race if they're going to beat this crew. So I was wanting to look towards some other directions.
Yeah, I am as well. I guess if you wanted to make the case that Strong Quality is going to get yet another good trip on the front end, I couldn't really argue with that. The pace projector shows him on a clear lead. I just wonder if he's really this good to win at 1.125 against this kind of field. And my general inclination is no, that he is not. So for me, I actually narrowed this race down pretty quickly to the 2 horses I think are clearly the best. Unfortunately for me, a horse I swore I was going to write off forever is Web Slinger. And he's just a horse, when you watch his Pegasus Turf last time, I mean, he had no shot. He got completely checked out of it in the upper stretch and somehow still gathered momentum and was running on at the end. Unfortunately for him, he's probably going to have to work out a trip. But the thing that swayed me this time is he gets Flavien Prat on his back, somebody he's never had before. And I just have faith that he can work out a trip for he gets a good draw of the 3 post. I think he'll be able to save plenty of ground and just find his way through. And I mean, this is a horse who was running speed figures as a 3-year-old that would beat Beatbox and Strong Quality. So I think he's really strong in here. And the other horse comes out of the same race, and that's I'm Very Busy, who's drawn to the far outside, but he's just a 4-year-old. He seems to be getting better every single time out. He was an unlucky loser in that Pegasus turf to Warm Heart, who snuck through along the rail. Great ride that day. But I just think these two are much the best horses in the field, and it would be hard for me to use anybody else, really.
Yeah, I mean, that Pegasus World Cup turf, in some years it's not come up as the strongest race. I think this year it was maybe on the borderline of being a true grade one affair. Warm Heart being in there definitely made it a much stronger race. But it compares very favorably to those races locally at fairgrounds that Strong Quality and Beatbox are coming out of from a quality standpoint. And I think you're right to suggest that Web Slinger and I'm Very Busy are coming in with better class lines than those aforementioned fairgrounds based horses. As for Web Slinger, Craig, it's kind of interesting that we're talking about these two together, both being the ones coming back in this race, because I'm Very Busy is actually the horse that caused Web Slinger to check at the top of the stretch. Edgar Zayas was going for a hole to try to find room for Web Slinger, and Irad Ortiz, as he so often does, just, bulls his way out and managed just to find that clear running room at the top of the stretch. And it was sort of at Webslinger's expense, who I'm not saying that there should have been a disqualification or anything, but as Webslinger was sort of going for a hole, suddenly I'm Very Busy just swung out and was right in his path in front of him. And Webslinger was forced to take up. And you can't do that in a 9-furlong race at Gulfstream Park after you've already been covering a lot of ground, getting a wide trip. As you said, there was just no chance for Webslinger to be successful that day. And yeah, he's a horse that's had a lot of excuses. I do believe that the switch to Flavien Prat is going to be to his benefit here for all the reasons that you highlighted. Nothing against Javier Castellano, who's been on this horse for most of his career, but I think even Javier would agree that on a number of occasions that he was not able to work out the right trip for this horse. He just continually made these 4 wide moves around the far turn. And part of that is a function of Webslinger sometimes not getting out of the gate that well, finding himself a little too far back in races that are more dominated towards the front end. But I mean, he does have a lot of ability, and we've seen it on occasion, going all the way back to the beginning of last year when he won that American turf by a nose. That was a really strong field he was beating that day, and he was done no favors by the trip on that occasion, going wide every step of the way. Since then, unlucky in the Belmont Derby, ran his race in the Saratoga Derby, though arguably covered more ground than program trading that day, just barely losing to that horse who would be a heavy favorite in here. And then excuse after excuse after excuse following that. So I think Webslinger is the horse to beat in this race, and I view him as the most likely winner. Though, Craig, I am interested to see how this pace does shake out, because you were mentioning that it's possible that Strong Quality could control in the front end. It's kind of interesting that Mark Casse appears to be in the driver's seat here, because he's got 3 horses in this race. He's got a couple of deep closers in Webslinger and Palazzi, and then he's got this speed horse in Strong Quality, and it doesn't really seem like there's anybody in here to go after him. I mean, the number 10 Rising Empire, he sort of applied token pressure in the fairgrounds last time, but he's not exactly the kind of horse that has speed to really make Strong Quality work on the front end. I guess my opinion with Strong Quality is that I think he lacks a little bit of heart and acceleration to him. And I wonder if he's just a horse that's not going to be able to see this race out at a higher class level, even if the trip and pace does work out in his favor. But I do worry a little bit that even if Strong Quality loses, if the pace is not going to come back quite enough for Webslinger, if he doesn't get out of the gate as sharply as he sometimes needs to. So I just had that reservation, but I completely agree with you that Webslinger is the best horse in this race. He's got the most ability. He just needs to work out that trip, and he's definitely due to find it. As for I'm Very Busy, I don't know what to do with him. I mean, you say he was an unlucky loser last time in the Pegasus World Cup turf, and yeah, Warm Heart got the best trip of anybody in that race, but Irad also gave I'm Very Busy an amazing ride of his own, saving ground every step of the way around the turns before angling out at the top of the stretch exactly when you want to angle out and getting this horse into the clear. And he took a good late shot at Warm Heart in the late stages, but I mean, I thought he got nearly a perfect trip to do it. And I frankly was never the biggest fan of this horse prior to that. He was decidedly second best to Integration and the Hill Prince, and Integration probably didn't get nearly as good a trip in the Pegasus World Cup last time, so maybe I'm Very Busy was lucky to beat that foe, turning the tables on him. I'm Very Busy's performance in the Pegasus World Cup turf, it makes me question the overall quality of that race because I didn't view him as that kind of horse beforehand, and maybe he's just a horse that Chad Brown has gotten to improve, but I kind of want to see it again, and I feel like the public is going to just accept that he is this leader among the turf division right now based on that one performance, and I'm not quite convinced yet, and also he's got to do it from this far outside post position.
Yeah, it's a tough post, no doubt. I mean, I have some faith in Irad Ortiz. He always seems to work out a good trip in these races. And for me, I look at it more as when I look at the TimeformUS speed figure. Since this horse came back in his 3-year-old season, he's just run a better speed figure every single time out. So I do think he's an improving horse. Yeah, I can see the question marks, especially given the post, but I just had trouble latching on to any of the others in here, particularly the horses that were coming out of that fairground stake. So I'm curious, is there anybody else you're interested in here?
There is. I like Webslinger, but from a value standpoint, I would probably have to make my top pick a horse that I just think is going to offer a lot more value, and that's the number 8 Point Proven. Craig, I alluded to it when we were doing the forecast for the Risen Star Day that I was kind of upset that this horse was not running in the fairgrounds because I would have liked him in that spot, and the Connections had instead decided to contest an optional claiming race early on the card, which I guess, unfortunately for them, came off the turf, though fortunately for Point Proven, he's got enough of dirt ability to still handle the task, and he won that day actually in visually impressive fashion. That he wasn't beating much in terms of dirt horses, mostly horses that have turf inclination, but he did at least show that strong leg kick that he possesses on the dirt last time. But when you go and watch this horse's races 2 and 3 back, he is better than it might appear in his recent turf form. That Woodchopper Stakes, there's an argument he should have won that day facing a Gigante who's back in this spot. He got steadied and lost momentum coming around the far turn when he was trying to commence a rally and did really well to regather himself to get up for third that day after looking like he had no chance to get in the money at the top of the stretch. Then 2 back, that was a race that did not feature a ton of pace. Chasing the Crown got a very good trip to win, and Point Proven was taking a good late shot at that horse, really finishing through the final quarter mile to fall less than a length short of getting to Chasing the Crown. Chasing the Crown came back in the fairgrounds and ran respectably. I think he was only beaten about 2 lengths for all the money that day, finishing, I want to say, 4th or 5th. Point Proven, I think the 1.125 distance really works for him, and he's just going to fly under the radar for low profile Connections. He's got to answer some class questions coming in here, but it just seems like a horse that is really taken to this fairgrounds turf course, and if Corey Lanerie can work out a trip this day, I think he's going to be pretty dangerous in here at a big price, because there are plenty of others coming out of the local preps for this that I'm just not that enthusiastic about. I think a lot of them have gotten good trips and just have run okay, haven't really delivered to the point that would make me interested in them in this spot. And Point Proven is the kind of 12, 15, 18 to 1 shot that I think could step up and surprise some people on Saturday.
Well, if there's one thing you can be sure of, it's Corey Lanerie is going to try to save ground on him and with him, and that would certainly be beneficial if he can get through. As soon as you started talking, I remembered how you mentioned him last time. And yes, Chasing the Crown came back. I think he was 5th, beaten 3 lengths, but he ran fine in that fairground stake. So good call on Point Proven.
And, if we're going to finish up talking about the fairgrounds, Craig, from a trip standpoint, like we did the Alstal Memorial earlier, I mean, I guess if you want to view it as a race that was dominated by rail runners, which it was, the one horse that got a wide trip that maybe you want to look at from that race is the number 7, Gigante. I still don't know if he's really best going 1.125 miles because he's achieved his better results going a bit shorter, but you can make the argument that he was most negatively affected by the trips in that fairgrounds last time. I couldn't quite get there with him, but he's the kind of horse I could potentially throw in as a B or C type because I do think he's likely to be double-digit odds in this race.
Yeah, I couldn't quite get there either. A lot of it was because of all that was sticking in my head was you saying he's probably a miler. But I can see the case that maybe he's not. He didn't have a great trip last time over that soft course. I will be interested to see how the course is playing. I think it'll be worth watching early on the card. There are, I think, at least 3 turf races before we even get to this pick 5. So certainly going to take the time to watch those races, something I don't always do on these really long fairgrounds cards, but I think it could pay some dividends here.
And just to wrap up, a horse that I also liked last time, the number 6 Palazzi. I think it's a little tougher to make a case for him here. He did lose all chance in the stretch of the fairgrounds. He just got completely sawed off in traffic when he was attempting to make a move between horses. However, I was a little lukewarm on him that day, only warming up to him because it just didn't appear to be that strong a field. I think this race is tougher, and it's hard for me to find too many races in Palazzi's past that make me want to bet him in this race, even at what's likely to be a very big price. But I wasn't quite as positive on him here as I was in the last race, even with that trouble last time. Let's move on to race 11. It is the Fairgrounds Oaks Grade 2 event going the 1.16 distance for the 3-year-old fillies. This race is very likely to produce 1 or 2 major contenders for the Kentucky Oaks. I think we're expecting 1 or potentially 2 scratches in this race. Marcus Hirsch already said early in the week that the number 3 Alpine Princess is scratching here for the Bourbonnais Oaks at Turfway instead. And the number 8, Accommodate Eva, I haven't yet seen the report of where she's going to run. She's cross-entered in a Louisiana bred race earlier on the card. So not sure if she's going to run there or here. She'd be a long shot if she goes in here, obviously. But Craig, you already mentioned that you're going to go a little thinner later in this pick 5 sequence. And I would imagine this race sort of fits that bill because when I handicapped it, I just had trouble getting past these 2 favorites.
Yeah, I did as well. And with a pretty strong lean to the actual morning line favorite, Tarifa, for me. I would use Intricate as well, but I think they both had really good trips in the Rachel Alexandra. Tarifa was clearly better. I guess the one thing you would have to question is it was over a very sloppy track that day. It sure looked sloppy anyway. It was very dark at the time, but I do think I remember it was quite sloppy. They just seem to be the best horses to me. I guess you could try to make a case for the 7, Our Pretty Woman, who's 2 for 2 so far in her career. The pace projector has her shown in front on a clear lead in a race that's going to favor horses on or near the lead. I just don't know if I really trust her win in the slop last time where she earned that big speed figure. And actually both of her wins have come in the slop. She's a horse that was entered for the turf first time out. So, I mean, maybe I could use her as a backup, but outside of that, it would be Tarifa as an A, Intricate for a B for me, and hard to really make a case for anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, we would probably just flip-flop our top 2 in here, Craig, but we pretty much agree that it's hard to get past the favorites in here. I mean, I also took a long look at the number 7, Our Pretty Woman, just due to that pace projector, because she is likely to control things on the front end. I just don't know how much it's really going to matter because the number 5, Tarifa, she's got plenty of tactical speed. I know they rated her last time, but I've been watching some of her recent workouts coming into this race. And the one thing that I've noted watching her morning training is she is extremely aggressive in the morning. Not quite like over the tipping point that would make you concerned about her running off in this race, but just seems like a horse that is really enthusiastic about going about her work. And I think that she's going to be in that position, sitting right on top of Our Pretty Woman in the early stages. So Tarifa's not going to be pace compromised in here, and I just think she's a better horse. They both beat the same horse in Standout Sensation 2 back and one back last time for Our Pretty Woman. Tarifa had to work a lot harder to get that victory, but she might have just needed that race and coming back for her next start, second off that 2-month layoff in the Rachel Alexandra. She took such a step forward. I mean, was no secret. The public one or
Not
two
the public.
one or two members of the public or groups, I should say, put some late money on her to get knocked down to 5-2 that day. So not a big surprise that she was going to take that step forward. But Tarifa really did deliver in that Rachel Alexandra. And was it the sloppy track? Maybe that contributed to it a little bit, but she had shown promise early in her career, so it wasn't some major surprise that she had that kind of ability within her. And I do think she's very much the horse to beat in this race, Craig, but intricate. She was coming off the layoff last time, just her first start of the season. Clearly not the goal. She had been training very well coming into that race, but still, Brendan Walsh is a trainer that I cited before, has very good numbers second off a layoff, doesn't always have them cranked up to be ready coming back for that first start of a campaign. So I think it is reasonable to expect that Intricate might be capable of taking a step forward in this race. I did watch one of her recent workouts, and I was really impressed with the way that she ran away from some company in the morning, just like the same visual impression that I got from her coming into the Rachel Alexandra. She just really seems to be doing well as a 3-year-old now. And I was very impressed by her race in the Goldenrod to conclude her 2-year-old season. She showed a really nice turn of foot to win that race. Again, not beating the strongest competition, but who was anybody in this field beaten aside from Tarifa and Intricate facing off against each other last time? It just is not the strongest group overall. I think these two are definitely a class above the rest. And Intricate just seems like one that has more potential to take a step forward from the Rachel Alexandra than Tarifa does. Even though they're both training well coming into this race, I would give Intricate the slight nod at what could be a better price. Not a much better price, but I think she's going to be more bettable than Tarifa is in this race.
Yeah, interesting you said about the workouts for Tarifa, because when I was watching that last race, I wonder what you think about this. It almost seemed like they were intent on putting her behind horses to see how she would react. And she handled it fine, particularly in the slop. But once she got out, she just exploded home. But I just thought that was an interesting thing as I watched the race. It just seemed that they really wanted to make sure she was behind horses.
Yeah, and she handled it pretty well, as you said. But in this race, I think it would be to her detriment if they were really intent on putting her behind horses, because I don't know who else is going to be in that position of applying pressure to Our Pretty Woman. I mean, maybe accommodate Eva if she runs. I guess the number 4, Lucy's Got Game, is stretching out from sprint races, but she's shown last on the pace projector. So, I mean, I think Tarifa does need to make better use of her tactical speed if she's going to get that same jump on Intricate than she did last time, because Intricate is not a slow horse. She's not a horse that needs to be as far back as she was in the last race, and I won't be surprised if these two are right alongside each other in the early stages of this Fairgrounds Oaks.
Yeah, and that's how the pace projector is going to look once Alpine Princess comes out with the scratch.
All right, Craig, let's move on to the feature race that concludes this Pick 5 sequence. Race 12 is the Grade 2 Louisiana Derby. This race also likely to feature a scratch, the number 1 Triple Espresso. It's reported that he is going to run a Turfway instead in the Jeff Ruby Stakes. So this field likely to go forward with 11 runners. And the winner of the Risen Star, Sierra Leone, not back in here, but we've got multiple horses that finished behind him that day, including the runner-up Track Phantom. And I think you kind of have to start the conversation with him, Craig, and decide what you're going to do with this horse, because he has been so consistent through this series of Fairgrounds prep races, winning the gun runner in impressive fashion, overcoming a fast pace that day in an early duel, and then just getting pretty good trips in the Lecomte and the Risen Star last time. Obviously was good enough to handle his Lecomte foes, got run down by a better rival in the Risen Star, but still did well to hold off the rest, going the mile and 1/8 distance. He and everybody else in this field has to stretch out to a mile and 3/16 for the first time. But I think you can at least rely on Track Phantom to work out a good trip for himself and to show up with a competitive effort, because he seems to do that every single time.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that when you said got a good trip. He makes good trips, like you note. He just is so good out of the gate. You don't often see horses like him, particularly in 2-turn races, who are just that quick, and yet he's able to rate once he makes the lead. I was a little disappointed he wasn't able to hold off Sierra Leone last time. I mean, he had everything his own way, but that one's not in this race. So I don't know. I think he's going to run well. I think he's clearly the horse to beat. He is the morning line favorite. I'm probably going to try to beat him, but he'll be on my ticket somewhere because I expect him to run well. I do have a little bit of concern about the mile and 3/16. I said he kind of didn't really give it up. He just probably got run down by a little better horse last time. But I was even a little shaky about the mile and an eighth for him when I watch him race. So the mile and the 3/16 gives me a little more pause, particularly at a short price.
Yeah, from a pedigree standpoint, I would also be concerned about extra distance for Track Phantom. On the flip side, for just forgetting pedigree and looking at him physically, you wouldn't be concerned at all because he is this massive, scopy horse who's got this huge stride on him, and he just gives the impression of a horse that's crying out for a mile and a quarter, even if his pedigree by Into Mischief out of a sprinting dam. I'm sorry, by Quality Road out of an Into Mischief sprinting dam might say different. But in this race, given the way that we usually see these paces work out in the Louisiana Derby, I'm not that concerned about it. And I do want to talk about this pace projector, Craig, while we're discussing Track Phantom, because I feel like every year this pace projector in the Louisiana Derby shows a fast pace. It's typically a race that draws a large field with horses stretching out. That's going to lead the pace projector algorithm to believe that horses will be more forwardly placed and there could be a potential fast pace developing. But year after year, we see connections get a little cautious about their horses getting this demanding distance, and the paces moderate a little bit more, and somebody get to dominate on the front end. We saw it last year with King's Barnes. We've seen it happen before in the Louisiana Derby, going this mile and 3/16 distance. And I think Steve Asmussen is just really going to be in the driver's seat with his two runners in here, Track Phantom and breaking from the inside. I mean, he's got the bookends in this field. The number 2 Hall of Fame. I won't be surprised if Hall of Fame gets a more aggressive ride than last time, where they seemed intent on getting him just off the pace in the Risen Star and rating him behind horses. I think they could be more aggressive in here, but even if Hall of Fame goes to the lead and Track Phantom has to stalk right outside of him, I don't think these two Asmussen runners are going to be pushing each other too hard in the front end. And I just anticipate this race is going to be more on the moderate side.
I tend to agree with that. It's one that it's just such a different race because other than this, we don't see 3-year-olds going this far. It's kind of weird. I'm not sure why the connections act like this, because if they're going to go back in the Derby, you're certainly not going to get a slow pace in the Kentucky Derby. So it seems like it would be a good test if you really want to find out if your horse is a true Derby contender. But unfortunately, it seems like a lot of people just want to get there and then see what happens. So I tend to agree with you. I think it's going to be Track Phantom setting a moderate pace at best, and Hall of Fame will probably be the one tracking him the most closest. And he's certainly not going to push him. Hall of Fame was a real head scratcher for me. I'm not sure what I want to do with him even at this point. My inclination is to not use him because I've just seen a lot of horses like this in the past where they run that huge figure, jump right up in the stakes, and it doesn't go well the first time. And maybe I'm just going too much by my gut feeling, but these horses rarely bounce back without some time. I went and watched his race a few times. It wasn't an ideal trip by any means, but I don't think it was a terrible trip either. He made a nice move and just had nothing left in the stretch after he got up close. So my thought is I just am very leery of a horse like this. I also don't think he's going to be 8-1 in this field. I think he's probably going to take more money because people are still going to see that big speed figure 2 back. So I agree with you about the pace, but not really as strong on Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by the work patterns of these two horses coming into this race. I watched when they worked together on March 3rd, and I thought that Track Phantom went slightly better than Hall of Fame that day. Track Phantom is just such an imposing horse in the morning. I mean, he's just a horse that catches your eye, and you get the sense that he's one that just wants to gallop around there at one pace all day. And he kind of he dwarfed Hall of Fame a little bit in that workout, but what the point I wanted to make was since then, it seems like maybe Track Phantom missed a work between March 13th and March 16th, just an odd pattern to have a 13-day gap there. And then the same thing with Hall of Fame. interesting that he's had no workouts from March 11th until the 23rd, which is when we're running this race, Louisiana Derby Day. So just a little odd with the preparation there. I think when you work these horses back on March 3rd, it would seem like the plan would be to get 3 works into each of them between the Risen Star and the Louisiana Derby, but they both have 2 on sort of an inconsistent schedule. So I don't know what to make of that. They're both in this race. I think you can assume they're both doing well enough to run, but it's just something that's a little odd to see from the Asmussen barn, who typically has horses on a pretty consistent pattern coming into their races. Craig, who do you like in this race? I mean, I guess we could go 2 directions. We could talk about some of the other Risen Star horses, but maybe you like some of them. So where were you leaning in this spot?
Well, I hate to say this. I have a feeling I'm probably going to steal your thunder, but I really like Honor Marie. I know we both liked him last time. I thought he ran just fine last time, given the pace setup that he had over the sloppy track. And I'm really expecting a big race from him here. I think he's going to love the mile and 3/16. It's second off of the layoff from his 2-year-old season. And as I said, I've watched that Risen Star several times, and a few times I just focused on him. And I just really liked how he finished off that race. I do worry a little, as you said, that maybe the pace will really be geared down, and that would obviously be to his detriment. But I'm hoping for a more, at best, honest pace. And I just think this horse is a lot better than what his speed figures show. And really, even his speed figure last time, it wouldn't take much of a leap to make him a really strong contender in this spot.
Yeah, well, you're right. I also like Honor Marie in this race. He's just a horse that you have to give one more chance to if you liked him last time, because as you said, he really had no chance from 1 furlong into that Risen Star based on the way the pace played out. And I would imagine the first furlong of that race is a big reason for the rider change here. Rafael Bejarano obviously had a lot of familiarity with this horse, had confidence in him that he could make these big runs from far off the pace as he did in the Kentucky Jockey Club. But he made a bit of a tactical error right at the beginning of the Risen Star, because Honor Marie actually broke pretty well, and he just took this horse under a strong hold and basically restrained him to get to the back of the pack, where maybe he didn't have to be quite that far back. And based on the way the pace played out, he just had way too much to do. I mean, Sierra Leone was several lengths ahead of him moving down the back stretch, and Sierra Leone made up a lot of ground to win that race and ran better than Honor Marie did, but I think it went a little bit unnoticed how much ground not by you, Craig, but by the general public, how much ground Honor Marie made up through the stretch and how strongly he was finishing across the wire to get as close as he did by the finish line compared to where he was at the top of the stretch, which was really in just a hopeless position. Ben Curtis has been riding well at the Fairgrounds meet, a former, I think, Irish jockey that's been riding at Fairgrounds this year. I have liked what I've seen from a few rides, and seems like a lateral move, but more than anything else, I think the rider switch just indicates that Whit Beckman is looking for a little bit more aggression coming out of the starting gate, and maybe we find Honor Marie still in the back half of the field, but maybe not out the back door like he was last time in the Risen Star. And he's got that powerful finish, like you said, not worried about the distance, being by Honor Code, who seems to get nothing but horses that want to go longer. And the damn side, I talked about it last time, the Risen Star, just a huge stamina pedigree. I mean, horses that wanted to go marathon distances in Europe in this family. So Honor Marie is supposed to appreciate the distance. And I have slight concerns that this pace might not heat up like the pace projector indicates, and it could be a similar situation to the Risen Star last time. However, I'm hoping that Honor Marie gets more into that position that Sierra Leone occupied in the Risen Star, as opposed to that position as far back as he was last time. So at what I do think is going to be a very fair price, I think we're going to get somewhere around that 8-1 morning line. Got to give him another chance.
Yeah, I think we can both agree that dragging to the back in a dirt race is just never the way to go. I mean, if a horse naturally goes back there, fine, but that was not the case with Honor Marie. A few more we can talk about. I'll go briefly over my thoughts on him. Agate Road, the 4-horse, he was visually impressive in the Davis. I do not think that was a very good race at all. He won't be on my tickets. I think that Big Close was more of an illusion, where the winner is a decent horse who set a fast pace that day, No More Time. He came back to run second in the Tampa Derby. But I don't think there was anything in behind those horses. So I'm not on Agate Road. Catching Freedom's a little more intriguing for me. He has the speed figures to compete in this race. He's just a horse that never seems to get it together. He still runs a bit goofy, doesn't change leads. He can't seem to run straight. If he ever puts it together, he's going to be really dangerous. And maybe I could use him as a backup. But the morning line kind of deters me a little bit. If he was going to be 6 to 8 to 1, maybe, but with Brad Cox and Flavien Prat, that's probably unlikely. But I could see him running well in here. Common Defense is a horse who ran well in the Rebel, and in Ken McPeak style, he's right back in the next prep at the fairgrounds. He didn't wait for the Arkansas Derby. I think this horse ran fine. He got an absolutely perfect trip sneaking through in the Rebel. I think he'll run good. It's hard for me to see him getting into the winner's circle. And I guess the last one we should talk about is Tuscan Gold. I have to assume he'll probably take some money off his big maiden score at Gulfstream. For me, the outside post, this is a pretty big step up in class, so he's not really for me.
Yeah, I mean, you summed up, I think, the thoughts on a lot of these horses well, and we don't disagree too much. I also have no interest in Agate Road. I have a little more interest in the other Pletcher runner, Antiquarian, though I think this is a big step up in class for him. And if the pace really moderates and gets to the point that it's on the slow side, do I think he has a big chance to win this race. He's not in my picks, but he's not impossible in this race. I acknowledge that. The number 5, Catching Freedom, we pretty much agree. I've been noting it over the past few months. He's that horse that just really struggles with his lead changes, and he's still green. The one positive thing I will say about him is that he has looked pretty underwhelming in his morning training coming into a few of his starts, and at least coming into this race, it really seems like he's picked it up in the morning. And I watched that March 9th drill where he actually changed leads right on cue at the top of the stretch for, I think, the first time ever. And he finished up well without a ton of urging. So it does seem like maybe something's clicking with Catching Freedom mentally. So I could see him taking a step forward in here. I just don't think as you said, you're just not getting the right kind of price to find out, because he still does need to get over that hurdle. And I don't want to find out with a horse that could be vying for favoritism in this race. The number 10, Common Defense, who you brought up, Craig, I think I'm going to be a little more positive on him than you. And you said that he's a horse that you think could run well in this race. I think he can win, because his maiden win 3 back at Oaklawn, when you go back and look at that race in retrospect, it's a little stronger than it seemed at the time. He beat a good field that day and was really going away at the end. I don't know what to make of the Southwest, run over that muddy track where it seemed like the rail was the place to be. And while Common Defense was never that wide, he was never towards the inside. And that just was a tough spot for him to step right up 3 weeks after the maiden win. But I thought it was a real testament to his overall ability and durability that he came back another 3 weeks later and ran so much better in the Rebel. Yes, he got that perfect trip from Brian Hernandez Jr., saving ground every step of the way, but he still delivered a strong finish to get within 2 lengths of Timberlake by the wire, finishing well clear of the rest of that field. He strikes me as a horse that just wants to gallop all day and really wants the distance. And I imagine that's one reason why Ken McPeak is targeting this as the next race, stretching out a little bit further in the Louisiana Derby. I think he's going to run well here. Brian Hernandez Jr., it's not the first time he's given a good ride in a Derby prep. He also turned in that magical ride on Mystic Dam to win the Southwest. So he could work out another good trip for this horse at Fairgrounds on Saturday. And based on that 110 TimeformUS speed figure last time, he's as fast as anybody else in this field, including Track Phantom. So I'm not going to say it's impossible that he takes yet another step forward in this race. I made Honoree my top pick, but Common Defense is very much the other horse that I think is going to be a bettable price that I want to use, because Common Defense strikes me as the kind of horse, Craig, that nobody's going to like in this race, because everybody thinks he got a perfect trip last time. And I think he's actually going to drift up off that 6-1 morning line. And I think that might be a mistake, because he's good and he showed it last time. As for Tuscan Gold, I wonder what price he's going to be, because I think he's attracting some support for Chad Brown and Tyler, who just won the Risen Star on Sierra Leone. And he was so visually impressive last time. He really beat nobody in that Gulfstream maiden race. and he did it impressively. And he seems like one that's going to appreciate every bit of distance he can get. And his debut was probably better than it looks because he had a bit of a tough trip that day behind Sierra Leone. It's not a move that Chad Brown makes often, and one not that he doesn't make that successfully. I looked it up in Formulator. Last out maiden winners that are 3-year-olds stepping up into graded stakes on dirt. Chad Brown's just 3 for 22, 14% with a 74-cent ROI. So he typically prefers to take his time with these horses, and he's running in this race because it's the last chance to get to the Derby, and the hand is forced a little bit. I'm not sure that otherwise he'd want to run this horse in this race as opposed to an allowance race, but that's kind of the hand you're dealt when you've got a potential Derby horse that's late developing. You've got to run to find out, and they're running. We'll see if Tuscan Gold proves to be good enough, but I think I'd need a bigger price than 8-1 on him, and I don't think we're necessarily going to get it in this race. And I think we covered the Louisiana Derby, Craig. We mentioned almost everybody, but it's a really fascinating race. It sounds like we've got some areas of agreement in here, and it completes a tricky pick 5 sequence. And taking in that entire sequence, let's give our recap. I'll let you go first as we kind of go back over and discuss how we might attack this one.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I know I'm probably going to spread a bit in the first 2 legs for sure, particularly the first leg that Tom Benson Memorial. It's a race where I'm going to use some prices pretty prominently in here. I like horses like the 5 Glorious Princess, the 12 Not So Close, the 10 not so much a price. Delahaye would probably be my top pick. But there's some others in here as well. I'm trying to remember all of them that we even talked about. I'm going to avoid probably even avoid the favorite Spirit and Glory. I'm just going to toss the horses out of that race. I just don't think it was as good, and there's some others coming in here. So spread race for me, going to use some prices and hope to get through this leg. It's a tough one, and this is one where if I actually miss, I may turn around and play the pick 4 because I really do like the sequence quite a bit. In the 9th race, I'm actually going to make Gasoline my A. I expect a much better trip for him this time. I will definitely use Best Actor as probably a B type. Touch Upon a Star would be a C, and maybe Money Supply as well. Probably throw in Super Corinto, as you mentioned. I wouldn't want to get knocked out by him as well. But a race where I really am hoping Gasoline is going to run well and turn the tables from that last start. The Mooney's Memorial, I'm going to have 2 A's in here, Web Slinger, and I'm Very Busy. The only other horse I'll consider using is your horse, Point Proven. You made a good case for him, and I could see him running well. I'm going to go very short in the Fairgrounds Oaks with Tarifa as my A, Intricate as a backup. Depending on how the ticket shapes up, I could wind up using just 2 A's and hope to be done with it. I considered using that Steve Asmussen filly on the lead, Our Pretty Woman, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to stick to those 2. And then in the Louisiana Derby, I'm going to use Honor Marie would be my A, but I would use some other horses in here, Track Phantom especially, and Catching Freedom would probably be the backups. Maybe Common Defense. It would just depend how much I narrow my ticket down if I could get him on there.
And for me, we have similar opinions in a few races, and I think we have a similar ticket structure here in where we want to lean and where we want to spread. And the Tom Benson does feel like a spread race, even if you're spreading with some prices, but you should be. There are multiple ones you can possibly consider. The one logical horse that I would want, or I guess when I say logical, I mean the one short price I would want to use is Delahaye, the number 10. But I'd want other coverage around her with horses that I think are going to inject more value into the sequence. And for me, those would be the number 5, Glorious Princess, as well as the number 14, Freitas the Red. They're sort of my 2 value horses in this race. Like I said, I want to use the 10 Delahaye, and my backups would be horses like the number 8, Girl Named Charlie, and maybe Spirit and Glory. I'm sort of on the fence about her. I don't think she's going to offer any great value in this race, but I could see her getting another good trip in here. I just think this is going to be a taller order for her. But I would be very happy to get through this race with the 5, 10, or 14. In the New Orleans Classic, race 9, I'm kind of between Gasoline and Best Actor as my 2 A's. Super Corinto would be more of a B for me. he's a horse that I would consider making an A, but I'm a little skeptical we're going to get that 12-1 morning line just given who's riding him. So in light of that expectation, I view him as more of a B type from a value standpoint. And the one that I'm going to take a slight stand against is the 3 Touch Upon a Star. I would use him as a C. I'm not going to completely leave him off my tickets if I'm right in other legs, but I just don't think he's going to be the right price to really lean on in this race. And I feel like a lot of handicappers are sort of excited to bet this horse at like 5-2 in this race. And I don't quite get it based on his form coming, his speed figures relative to the rest of this field coming in. In the Mervyn Muniz Memorial Classic, I would lean on the number 3 Web Slinger and the number 8 Point Proven as my 2 A's. I think that they are both going to be fair prices for them. Web Slinger might not even be favored in this race, and I think he is the most likely winner. And I think Point Proven is going to be somewhere in the 15-1 range, and I think he's more likely to win than that. The others that I would use as backups would be the 13 I'm Very Busy, who I kind of view as one of those neutral value horses who can win, but I'm not necessarily excited about betting him in this race. And then the number 7 Gigante, who I think is maybe the one trip horse that you want at the fairgrounds last time, even though I'm not totally convinced that this is the right spot for him. But there are just a lot of horses in this race that I'm not particularly interested in, so I'll try to narrow that one down a little bit. In the Fairgrounds Oaks, like with Craig, I'm down to the 2 favorites. If I'm going to separate them, I'd make Intricate the A and Tarifa the B. But if the ticket comes up affordable enough, I might use them both as A's. But I would lean towards putting more emphasis on Intricate, who I do think will be a slightly better price and is as likely to win as the favorite. And then closing it out in the Louisiana Derby, Craig and I both like the number 7 Honor Marie. He is, of course, an A on my tickets. I would have to decide based on how expensive this is getting, whether I use 3 A's in this race, those being Honor Marie, Common Defense, and Track Phantom, or whether I use Honor Marie as the only A and knock Common Defense and Track Phantom down to B's. That might be the more prudent and affordable option based on my opinion. But it's a tricky one. I think the Common Defense could be the right price. And I actually toyed with putting him on top in this race. I'm sort of married to going back to Honor Marie in here. And Track Phantom, I just expect to run well. Horses like Hall of Fame and Catching Freedom, they could be C's for me, but I wanted to try to go towards the stronger opinions that I had at better prices in this Louisiana Derby.
I'm glad you mentioned Girl Named Charlie. I was really searching for a horse I knew I was forgetting in the 8th, but that's one I actually do like.
Yes, I was trying to find it when you were talking, Craig. And yes, I imagine Girl Named Charlie would be an A for you in that first leg. Well, that wraps up the handicapping of this Pick 5 sequence on Saturday at Fairgrounds. It's an interesting one. Hopefully the weather cooperates. Hopefully there are no more further scratches than those we've already outlined on this podcast, and it should be a fun day of racing. Everybody, thanks for listening to the podcast this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for tuning in. Good luck playing Fairgrounds on Saturday, and make sure to catch Craig and I when we're back for the TimeformUS Pacecast next week.